Okay, well, like Ivy said, we each have different topics, and my topic is about applying for faculty jobs. And are some of you kind of get the point that you're close to that? Okay, so people who are not very close to it yet, this might just seem like, oh, it's so far away, I can't even think about it. But for those of you who are close to it, I hope this will be useful to you. And as I said, feel free to ask questions when we get to the question period. So I teach at the University of Toronto. We've got an undergraduate program and a graduate program. So when I'm going to talk about my experience from having been on many job committees in the past few years. So I think including this year, it's like 6 job search committees that I've been on. Most of them in linguistics, but some in other departments as well. And so I'm sort of drawing from one university, but from more than one department within the same university. And I thought that I would divide it into 3 parts. So the first thing is the job application, and I'll talk about 2 pieces of the application. And then the second thing is, if you're so fortunate to get an interview, what is it that you want to do in presenting your research in the interview? So there's lots of parts of a job application that I'm not going to talk about. I'm just going to talk about it with respect to research, since that's our theme here, is research. We could talk about it with respect to teaching and respect to service too, but I'm not going to do that. Okay, so applications change over time, and so I'm going to talk about what the applications tend to look like today. So if you think that there's a job that comes up, you read the linguist list and you read the job ads, you want to read carefully what it is that they ask you for to submit. But usually today, there's a couple things that you're asked for. One is a cover letter, another is a CV, a research statement, a teaching statement, a sample publication, a teaching dossier. So that's sort of the typical thing that's being asked for in job applications today. So I'm just going to talk about 2 of those, the cover letter and the research statement. But if there's enough time, I might say something just very brief about the CV. So what I did was I looked through quite a few applications for the jobs at the University of Toronto that in the past few years. So the things I'm going to tell you are based on applications for 5 different jobs. These are all linguistics jobs in the past 2 years. Some of them tenure stream, some of them 1-year, 2-year jobs. Okay. So what I did was I kind of looked at the cover letters and the research statements to give you an idea of what kinds of things people are doing in those. So the cover letter first, the cover letter is, if they're asking for a research statement, the cover letter is usually pretty short, maybe 1.5 pages, okay, not much more than that. And the thing, and some are really short, like some just say, enclosed, please find. But most of them are more than that. So most of them introduce themselves, and they kind of highlight the CV. They just say the major things that they've done. So not everything, just pretty short, and why they're qualified for the job, but not long at all. Okay, so that's the cover letter. The research statement, first I'll talk about the length of the research statement. So I looked at the length of the research statements. So the ones for the syntax, I'm just going to say it by the position because there's slight differences between them, but not very much. So what I looked at was the people on the short list and how long their research statements are. Okay, so the one for a syntax position, they were between 2.5 pages and 3 pages. And then the ones that have references, the references are on top of that. Okay. For a phonology position, they were between 2 pages and 4 pages. For a semantics position, I think semanticists like to write more because these were between 4 pages and 13 and a half pages. I'm glad you laughed because I find the long ones kind of overwhelming. And there's a lot of these jobs, you're getting 60, 70 applications. And so as a committee member, it's kind of hard to absorb the long ones. It's really better to have the short ones. Then I have 2 other ones. One was another phonology position. They were between 2 and 3 pages. And the psycholinguists don't write very much. They were all 2.5 pages. So you can see 2, 3 pages, 4 pages is probably where you want to go. Now I think if you talk to your advisors, there are people that are writing these really long ones. So your advisor might suggest that to you, and you're going to have to think about whether you really want to write that long one. But I think that the research statements that really have an impact are the ones where you highlight the major things that are of interest to you. Is that okay?
I want him to stay, because if it happens again,
Okay.
we'll have to just drag him back in here. Sorry.
It's okay. Okay, so the ones where you highlight the major things, like sometimes in the really long ones, you almost get the feeling like people are taking every project they worked on from the time they began graduate school. But what you want to do is think about the job that you're applying for. What are the things that are really relevant for that job? So if you're applying for different kinds of jobs, you have to look at your research statement to be sure that it's fitting the job that you're applying for. And it's important to keep in mind that search committees will have on them some people, maybe, that are the specialist in the area that you're in, but maybe they won't have anybody that's a specialist in the area that you're in because they're seeking to expand what their offerings are. So I think when we hired in my department a semanticist 7 or 8 years ago, there was nobody that really knew that much about semantics. So you want to think about that you want to talk to the specialist, but you also want to talk to the non-specialist. It's not just the specialist that you want to talk to. And what that means is you want to find a way of presenting your research that people can see what's interesting about it and what's important about it. All the little details, you can get lost in the details. You want to make sure you're giving that big picture. Okay? Then you can give some of the details, but only the details. It's hard for people to understand. What is it that really excites this person? What's the kind of contribution that they feel that they're making? What would they bring to this department? Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so that's the research statement. So my own feeling is not too long. Make them 2 to 3 pages and highlight the major things. Okay. And if you're being asked, you're applying for a job that wants a kind of methodology, talk about your methodologies, but talk about first your questions. Don't talk about your methodologies first, unless it's a job about methodology. But if it's a job about sociolinguistics, talk about first the sociolinguistics things that excite you, not about the methodologies that you do those sociolinguistic things. The methodologies are important, but they're not the main thing. Okay, I'll just say one other thing that's kind of about research about the application. What you see on a lot of CVs now is that people have refereed publications, and a lot of people now under refereed publications are putting things that are submitted to refereed journals or in progress to be submitted to refereed journals. And I have to say, as committee members find that a little weird, that you're putting under refereed publications things that you hope will be refereed publications. So think about that and talk to your advisor about whether it's a good idea to do that or not. Okay, so that's the application. Now, let's imagine that you get to the interview stage. Yeah, keep your fingers crossed. So, interviews are going to be set up differently at different places, but most places, you'll have an interview together with the search committee, and you'll be asked to give a job talk. There might be other things as well. Some places they ask you to teach a class. In my department, people meet with the graduate students and meet with each of the faculty members. So in a way, that's like a bunch of small interviews. So in the interview, you're going to be asked questions, and those will usually be questions about research, questions about teaching, and then questions about service, questions about what you might bring to that particular department. So what I did was look at the kind of general questions that we've used in our interviews in the past few years. So I thought I would just give you those questions. Questions are going to differ from place to place, but these are kind of the types of questions that you want to think about. Okay. So I'll just take syntax as an example because that's the area we're hiring in right now. So one of the first questions we ask is, what's the goal of inquiry in the area of syntax? And because there's a lot of overlap right now between syntax, morphology, semantics, we ask, where do you see syntax in this whole panoply of things? So that's usually the first question. So we want to see how they situate the larger field that they're part of. Okay. We then usually ask questions about their own research and how their own research fits into that larger area. What are the major questions that they're interested in investigating? We get at these things in a lot of different ways, and we ask them where they're planning to go with their research. And one way we'll often say is that if they were applying for a grant to support their research over the next 5 years, what would that grant proposal look like? Right? So would they want to support students? Mostly, what are the questions that they're interested in asking? And what we want to see in that question is, are you thinking beyond the dissertation? And that can be really hard, because when you're applying for jobs, you're usually in the midst of writing your dissertation, and it's hard to think beyond that dissertation. But it's kind of important to think of what are the other things, what are the directions you'd like to go. And if you're hired, you're not tied to those directions, but it's looking for the thinking about it. And we found that people often can't do very well with these questions of where do they want to go. And the people that really stand out are people that have really interesting and thoughtful answers to these kinds of questions. We also ask them about how their research would fit into this particular department. So why are you applying to this university? You know, is there something you have to bring to this university? What would they have to bring to really making this department continue to be a strong department? Or if it's a department that's looking to strengthen, what would you have to bring to making this a stronger department than it is now? If it's a new area for that department, how might you go about building the research in that area so that it can become a really strong department in that area? We tend to ask about involving students in the research, both undergraduates and graduate students. There's a lot of focus, I think probably everybody knows, on undergraduate research these days, so ways of engaging undergraduates in research is great, and I think graduate students, it kind of goes without saying. And a question that I think didn't get asked for a long time and is asked again has to do with research methods. Ivy said before this started that at UMass they can now do, for instance, 2 phonology qualifying papers, but they have to use different methods. So methods have become really important, and a lot of times you see someone, a place searching for a syntactician who does experimental work, or the semanticist we hired last year, we were looking for somebody that did field work. So you might well be asked questions about what kinds of methods, what's your statistics background like, and things like that. Okay, so those are kind of overall the research part of the job interview questions, and there's also teaching and so on in those questions. And then usually there's an opportunity for you to ask questions in a job interview as well. And so you maybe want to have some questions that you could ask. Now the job talk, that's the next important part, and I just have a few lines on this so I won't take so long on it. So one of the things that's really important with the job talk is to think about who the audience is. So if you go to a conference and you give a talk, it's usually the case that you can talk to the audience that knows a lot about what it is that you're doing, that's got background in that area. But a job talk is kind of different because you're talking, let's continue to say syntax, you're talking not just to syntacticians, but you're talking to faculty that work in a wide range of areas. Might be syntax, but it might be phonetics. You're talking to students from, if you've got a master's program, from a master's program through to the advanced PhD students. So again, you want to kind of try to find a way of situating the talk so that people can get excited about the research. So not talking just to the specialists in your area if you're looking at some current problem in minimalism, which I can't name for you, but if you're looking at some current problem, you can't assume that everybody knows everything about that and is going to be really excited about this new finding that to the outsider is like, well, this is like a needle in a haystack. You want to get them excited about the bigger issue and then show how it's really important what you're doing fits into it. And if they tell you to take 40 minutes, take 40 minutes. If they tell you to take 30 minutes, take 30 minutes. Keep it to the time that they ask you to. So I think with the job talk, the most important thing is to talk to the audience. And it's good if you don't know who the audience is to ask the person who contacts you about it. What's the audience like? How long should I talk? People should tell you how long. But if they don't tell you, don't feel afraid to ask those questions to find out. So those are what I see as the main goal, the main places where research comes up. So it's presenting yourself well in your application, okay, trying to be at a level that people can understand what it is that you're doing, and when you go to the job interview, really thinking about where you fit in with the larger field, and that the audience that you have isn't the audience of specialists. It's an audience of some specialists and lots of people who are looking to how would this person fit into this department, what do they have to offer to this department. And to some degree, you're kind of looking at teaching through the job talks too. So you want to make sure that you pay attention to those. So practice, practice, practice your job talks so that you're really ready to do them.